Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Community Access. Last week, you have enjoyed two parts of Terry's visit with Brain Balance co-founder Dr. Robert Melillo. Coming up is part 3, all of today on our Community Access. Welcome back. Last week, Terry talked with Brain Balance co-founder Dr. Robert Melillo, talks about the proven results of his groundbreaking program and why he founded it. Terry?
Dr. Robert Melillo is the co-founder of Brain Balance Centers.
1 out of every 10 children in the United States now is diagnosed with ADHD. There is no program as comprehensive as this. Most of the time it starts in the womb. We know that autism starts in the womb.
Oh, okay.
You know, at least that's what the latest research seems to confirm, that
so
first or second trimester.
As a mother.
Exactly. Maternal stress is one of the major factors. But it also, you know, we know that there's a lot of factors that affect men. Age, stress in men.
Right, sure.
So it's both a male and female thing. But what happens is those effects, what they do is they turn off genes that should be turned on at the right time.
Of course.
So,
makes sense.
and the brain develops, and the right and the left brain develops in stages. So the right side of the brain develops in the womb and for the first 2 to 3 years of life. And so all of the experiences that the child is exposed to in the womb, which is obviously very different from what's exposed outside, and even in the first 2 years of life, that shapes that right side of the brain more than the left. And then it switches to an emphasis on the left brain for the next 2 to 3 years. And so all of that new experiences, like going to school and learning to speak, and that all affects the left brain, right? Then it switches back again. So what happens is, as we mature, and as the brain grows and matures, there's really 2 or 3 things happening at the same time. One is brain cells are growing, and they're getting bigger and more powerful, able to produce faster and faster impulses. The brain is becoming more insulated with fat covering what we call white matter. The brain cells are becoming more physically connected. They're starting to grow and connect to one another. But most importantly, they're becoming more coordinated and synchronized, so that more and more brain cells are able to fire in a synchronous pattern with one another.
Okay, right.
And over longer and longer distances. And also, both sides of the brain are becoming more and more different from one another as we mature. And those factors altogether is ultimately what makes the human brain and what makes us unique. And that is really part of development. If any of those things doesn't happen appropriately, it affects the child's ability to learn and access information and recall information, and affects their ability to learn. Because all of childhood is really about learning, right? If it affects an adult, it's not a learning issue. That's more depression, anxiety, you know, issues like that. But with a child, it's a learning issue, because that's what they're doing. And so all of these issues really come down to that. So like I said, we know that a lot of these issues, especially right brain delay issues, since the right brain is forming in the womb, really start in the womb. So what that means is that if it starts in the womb, it means that things like vaccines can't cause it. Right? It can, maybe vaccines could make the symptoms worse or contribute in some way that we don't really understand, but it doesn't cause it because it's already there when they're born.
Okay, and so brain balance, the Achievement Center works, the program is individualized,
right,
and works to balance that out, but also if there's areas that maybe a child missed at a certain stage, that can be developed then? Is it never too late?
Never too late. That's the beauty of what we call neuroplasticity,
Wow.
which
Right.
is that the brain, what most people don't realize is, the brain is really like a muscle, that you use it or lose it, that if you have areas that are weaker or underdeveloped, that you can strengthen them by doing them like you would exercises at a more intense level, right? If you injured your arm and it was in a cast and it came out, 6 months later, this arm's going to be all shriveled up, right, and underdeveloped, and you look at it and it's always going to stay that way. But if somewhere along the line you say, well, I want to get this arm to be like this arm and the way it was supposed to be, then what you're going to do is you're going to do exercises. And you're not going to do exercises on both arms because that'll keep it unbalanced, right? You're just going to work the one arm, the weak arm, and you're going to do it repetitively. The more intensely you do it, the more frequently you do it. And if it's, you're not going to do leg exercises for your arm, right? You're going to do arm exercises. And so you're going to do specific exercises based on that weakness. You're going to do it enough for a long enough time until you build it up to where it was supposed to be, and then you can stop. And it's not going to all of a sudden shrivel up to the way it was before, right? So this is the way the brain works. If there's areas, and again, we have hundreds of different centers, and thousands or tens of thousands of different networks and subnetworks and micro networks in the brain, on either side of the brain, that are more specialized in different things. And so the combination of disconnection and underdevelopment and lack of integration in different networks is different for every person. Just like every brain is different. Your brain is not the same as mine or his, because as we're developing, the way your connections, what we call your connectome, meaning the way your brain cells have wired with one another, is unique to you. Nobody else's brain is wired like yours.
Agreed.
Nobody else has had the combination of experiences in your life that has ultimately shaped your brain. Even two identical twins, they start crawling, one crawls this way, one crawls that way, and forever in life their brains are going to be different, right? Because now their brains are shaped differently. And so every child we see is unique. Every issue is different. And there are strengths and weaknesses. We all have strengths and weaknesses, but the bottom line is that if those strengths and weaknesses become too far apart, that in itself becomes a disability.
So some disabilities then, say autism, and I know that it's a huge spectrum,
right,
and even hard to identify.
Yes.
I'm getting that can almost be not reversed.
It can be reversed.
Can it?
In some cases.
Wow.
First of all, it's a complex issue. You have to understand that there's really two major subsets of autism. One is called syndromic, and the other is called non-syndromic, or essential. What it means is that 10 or 15% of kids that are labeled with autism also have some either known or unknown genetic mutation, right? So they have like Down syndrome, Fragile X, tuberous sclerosis, Landau-Kleffner.
Right.
So they have a genetic syndrome, and they're also labeled with autism. So to me, I don't really look at that as autism.
Right.
Or that's one form of autism that is truly genetic. Now, the 85 to 90% of kids that are labeled with autism have what's called essential type of autism. And there is no known genetic mutation that's ever been clearly identified with that, right? So they have more of a developmental issue. It's not a genetic mutation, probably. It's what we call an epimutation, meaning it's the way the environment is interacting with gene expression, so that genes that build the brain are turned off during different stages of development, right? So they're not permanently damaged, they're just turned off. And we know they can be turned back on. So those children may have the potential of completely being normalized or recovered. And there's been some very good research over the past few years, especially from the University of Connecticut Medical School, that has really shown that children that were even labeled with pretty severe forms of autism, that when they followed up on them years later, that they had been completely normalized in every function. And it's not that they outgrew it, they were somehow treated out of it.
Yeah, worked at it.
Right. They went through some combinations or different combinations of activities or programs or treatments. And so, and that was about 30% of the kids that they saw at the time.
That's a good percentage.
Yes. And so there's many other cases that have been reported in the literature of children being completely recovered from autism. I can tell you in our centers, we have many kids that come in that may be on the milder version of that scale, and many of them have these behavioral scales that they fill out, which really is the way you diagnose or label these things.
Okay.
And then they refill it out when they're in our program, and they no longer fit that criteria. So
hence why you didn't say diagnose.
Right. We don't diagnose. See, we're not a healthcare facility.
Great.
We're a learning center. And so we don't do treatment, we don't diagnose, we don't do any of those things. All we do is we assess kids for really strengths and weaknesses that may affect their ability to learn in one realm or the other. And what we're doing is we're addressing those. Now, the understanding of it is built on, this whole volume of scientific brain science underneath it that helped me to put together this program.
Just so credible.
But it's really, our program is still, we're just specialized learning centers that are using this brain science in a more comprehensive way, and really using a very comprehensive, we're not just sitting down with children and doing paper and pencil. They're doing physical exercises. They're doing sensory stimulation. We have them listen to certain types of music and sounds, or, light or colors, or, we have them do things with balance and coordination and gross motor and fine motor and timing and rhythm, and, we're doing things with their sense of smell, which is very, very important, along with academic training and cognitive skills and behavioral management and nutritional and dietary support. So it's just a very comprehensive, there is no program as comprehensive as this, but also, really directed in the way that we're directing it. That's what makes us unique.
So individualized.
And it's so individualized,
not just something that you walk through with everybody
And
else.
we're really trying to address the reason why the child can't learn, right? We're not just saying, okay, let's just, I have a degree in neuropsychology as well, and there's two different models to rehabilitation. One is what's called compensation, which means that you're just going to try to compensate for a disability or an injury or whatever. So somebody breaks their leg, you give them a crutch, right? That is what our schools primarily use, because they're overwhelmed, really.
Oh, yeah.
So the best that they can do is really hope to try to compensate. And also, most people are under the misconception that these things are all based on genetic mutations and there's nothing you can do about it. That's not true.
So you've given them hope.
So the fact is, we know from the very beginning, the science is telling us that, there is a possibility that, these things can be certainly greatly improved, if not completely, recovered or eliminated in many cases, especially things like ADHD and learning disabilities and dyslexia, where most people are told that these are lifelong conditions that there's nothing you can do about, and the best you can hope is to try to compensate. So, if you can't read, then let's develop some other way that you can learn. Maybe you can just learn auditorily or through books on tape or something. So those are compensation models. And so what happens is that they work to a certain degree, but no one's ever going to get better from that. So that what we end up doing is saying, well, see, they can't get better. And it is a lifelong problem. And we see people that are adults and they say, yeah, I still have the same problem I had as a kid. But the question is, well, what did you ever really do to try to fix it? Well, really nothing.
You're told this is what you have, and
right.
this is what
and
you're
most
gonna
parents
live
are told, hey, just get used to it.
Yes.
Don't expect much.
How hopeless.
I mean, I've even had parents come in that have literally come from people that have told them, well, start looking for an institution for your child.
Oh, my goodness.
Because, you know, what is the parent's fear? You know, you're a parent with a child with a disability and with an issue and who has really struggling learning or with forming relationships or friends. And they're sitting there saying, what's going to happen to them? You know, they're not worried about whether they're getting into Harvard. Right. They're worried, are they going to be happy? Is anybody ever going to love them?
Who's going to advocate
I mean,
for
and
them?
who's going to take care of them when we're not here, right? God forbid something happens to us. That's what these are the fear that parents are walking around. And they're basically told, well, you know, send them to an institution. That's it? That's the only thing I can hope for? That's the best? And, you know, so what happens is that it also affects the parents. You know, they become kind of sometimes very, you know, they're in pain. They're in pain. They can become bitter and angry, and 82% of families with children with these disabilities end up in divorce. And that's a big issue. That was the topic of my second book, was how to be able to deal with those issues. But the bottom line is, the way to deal with it is to fix the problem. Is to fix the problem in the child. And then everything gets better, right? And to try to just behaviorally manage it, to try to compensate, you know, it may... Or medicate, which is really just a compensation, because it doesn't really, I mean, it manages the symptoms for a period of time. But we know that most of the there's been major research articles that have come out in the last few years that show that there's really no long-term therapeutic effect, meaning that, you know, as soon as the medication wears off on a child, all their symptoms come back.
It's not a rehab.
No, and we know that it really, most of it seems to have only really a short-term benefit, and that there isn't any long-term solution through medication, and just staying on medication. And in fact, after a while, it just doesn't really work anymore. So, you know, it's good for short-term relief, and it's good for short-term management, but parents are not given any long-term hope or long-term solution. We do. We're the first thing that's out there really giving them really that hope and that long-term solution, saying, no, we're looking at the long term. We're looking at how we can affect your child for the rest of their life. And we do. And we do it, you know, all the time. And we're successful in almost every child at significantly improving their function. You know, does every child get to their optimum level, or, you know, obviously, you know, nothing's 100% perfect, but every child is improving, and in most cases, we're getting children really back to where they're supposed to be. And that's what parents say to us, that you just gave me back my child that I always knew was there, but was told I would never see.
Oxford Orient Fish helps provide emergency aid to the people of Oxford, Ligorian, Addison, and Oakland Townships. One of the only self-served food banks in the state, Oxford Orient Fish provides once-a-month food supplies based on the size of the family. To donate, volunteer, or to find out more, call Oxford Orient Fish at 248-628-3933 or go to their website, oxfordorientfish.org. Oxford Orient Fish, neighbors helping neighbors.
Dealing with, you know, really one of the largest epidemics ever, probably the largest childhood epidemic, and nobody's really talking about it.
And to hear you call it an epidemic is refreshing. It's disappointing, because it is. It is. But it's refreshing.
Right.
To hear somebody acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of people out there that are, but there are a lot of people that aren't. And there's usually reasons for that. I think the main reason is that people that are really getting a lot of their funding for genetic research. There's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. But, you know, autism 30 years ago was 1 in 10,000 children in the United States. It's now 1 in 45, 1 in 30 boys. And I've been able to show in my book, and really through very extensive research, and really objectively looking at it, that about 50% of that increase is because we're recognizing it more, and that we're better at understanding it, and because of changes in the way we diagnose it. But at least 50% or more are unexplained, which means that represents new cases that never existed before. And so if there are new cases every year, that never existed before, then that's an epidemic. And when polio was declared an epidemic when it was 1 in 2,700 kids.
Really?
Yeah, we're now basically 1 in 5 children in the United States have some sort of disability. And it's growing at about 15 to 20% per year. And what we know is that, rather than most people we hear in the media say that these things are overdiagnosed, in my research and in speaking to some of the top epidemiologists in the country, almost everybody actually says that these things are underreported in the literature. So if anything, it's worse than we think. So we're talking about conservatively 20 to 25% of kids in the United States have some sort of diagnosable official label. And there's probably a lot of people out there that don't have a label.
So what would your advice be to a parent who suspects that there's something and cannot get that label?
There's a couple of clues right off the bat that parents should be really aware of that they're not often told. First of all, developed milestones matter a lot. That
and they can get that information
kid,
anywhere.
They can just, well, it's in my books, but almost everybody knows, or any any pediatrician or OBGYN or whatever will give them that these are the normal milestones, right? But what they're often told is that it doesn't matter if they miss or skip or don't do it or do those things at the wrong time. That's completely untrue. Meaning that, right off the bat, like if a child should roll over at 3 to 5 months equally to both sides. If they don't, there's a delay. And if they do it to one side or not the other, there's an imbalance. They should crawl in a certain way at a certain time and for a certain length of time. And if they don't go through those stages of crawling, where they crawl on their belly, and then they do what's called a marine crawl, and then they do the marine, and then they do an actual what's called a tiger crawl, and then they should stand up and walk at around 12 to 13 months. No later, and not much earlier, maybe 11 months. So between 11 and 13. And I think, in my experience, in my opinion, and that those windows are very important. And there's some literature to suggest that even a month delay when you follow these people out to adulthood makes a huge difference in their cognitive skill and development.
Right.
So even there's literature showing that people that were even a month delayed in walking, that when you follow them out and you look at their frontal lobe cognitive skills later on, there's a significant difference in their cognitive abilities. So with parents, the first thing you look at is, did your child meet all their milestones? Not just motor milestones, but then cognitive milestones. And in my book, Reconnected Kids, I give a whole extensive list of cognitive, meaning when should they first speak, how many words should they speak, what concepts should they get, social and emotional milestones, like when do they start to understand nonverbal communication and understand emotions and respond to smiles, and then also motor and physical milestones, like when do they go to the potty, should their teeth develop, and no book has put all of that together in one book. But paying attention to those milestones is really important, and if they're delayed, they're going to be delayed. Now, it may not be delayed to the level, like, let's say a child that's getting C's in school, and the parent goes in and the teacher says, they're okay, they're getting C's, they're right where they should be, basically saying, well, your child's a C student, and they're doing C work, and that's okay, because they're not causing a problem for me in class, right? And the parent says, okay, C, all right, well. And they don't realize that that child, if they looked at their milestones, was delayed, and that child should be an A student, but they're getting C's. Now, it doesn't really come to the level that everybody's going to look at this as a disability, but clearly they're not meeting their potential, right? Now, it may also end up being to the point where really they're getting D's and F's, and now it is looked at as a disability. It's just a matter of degree. But if there's a milestone delay, your child is not functioning and is not developed in an optimal way. And that can be changed at any given time. this was my kids. These were my kids' story. I was that parent. And, you know, we always hear, you know, when's somebody going to do something? Well, you know, sometimes you have the opportunity to be that somebody and that someone. And you have to take on that responsibility. And that's what I've done. I've looked at it as a responsibility to parents, especially to parents, because I know the pain that it causes.
Right. The frustration.
I learned that early on, and I know my pain, and you know how difficult and challenging it has been. And my kids are now great. You know, the most important things in my life, and my wife and I, and my wife is also a very important part of what I do. Her and I do a radio show and a TV show, and really, because we've had to manage this. Not only me as a professional, but we've had to manage it as a family.
And a family,
right?
right.
So we've had to cook the foods and, you know, eliminate the foods and manage their diet and manage their, you know, their screen time and, you know, manage their behaviors and manage our relationship and make sure it didn't fall apart.
Right.
And so, you know, we want to try to now use that experience along with my knowledge to really help these families because, you know, I just was on the phone with a woman. She called me. She was a friend of a friend, and he said, "Will you just talk to this?" She's from Connecticut, and her son had, you know, this kind of really unlabeled, undiagnosed disability that he was struggling really in school, but he had some things that he was really good at. And, you know, she'd been trying and spending a lot of money going around trying to figure out what was going on, and she just was basically told, like everybody else, well, we really don't know what the problem is, but, you know, this is just the way it is, and these are some of the things you can do to try to compensate and help, but don't expect too much. And, you know, it was really frustrating.
Too many people hear that.
And she was, you know, at the end of the conversation, which essentially came to, you know, get my book and try that, and then, you know, we have centers in Connecticut. She started crying, and I said, why are you crying? She said, because I've just felt so alone. I've been out there trying, but, you know, I felt like nobody cared. And I felt like there was nobody listening to me. And nobody could give me any answers. And certainly nobody gave me any hope. And she said, now after I talked to you for a half hour, you gave me more information than anybody has ever given to me. And you've given me hope.
Oh,
and
so
she said, and I don't feel like I'm alone anymore, and I feel like finally I found somebody that cares.
One of those things is a company called Brain Balance. They help to rehabilitate children that have developmental disorders like autism and ADD and Asperger's and dyslexia. If there's anybody that knows of a family that has a child with a developmental disorder, you need to talk to them and find out what they're doing. I'm seeing it firsthand. I've got a guy that works with me, and his son has had a complete transformation in 9 months' time.
Thank you for joining part 2 of our visit with Brain Balance co-founder Dr. Robert Melillo. Join us in our final interview with Dr. Melillo on our next Our Community Access, where Dr. Melillo talks about country star Zach Brown's contributions to both the Brain Balance movement and Dr. Melillo's book, The Disconnected Kids Nutrition Plan. See you there.
A great series, Terry. And we hope you enjoyed our program. So, for our reporter and editor, Terry Stiles, I am Bill Service, and you have a great, great week.